This right here, and Jordan had a little hand in it. This is not the whole thing. I'm just going to insert that into this presentation. But the Silverado that we were fooling with had an issue. Eddie had worked on it. And he didn't have speed signal, and you know, you have an idea that whenever you check the wires all the way from the speed sensor to the engine controller, and like we unplugged the speed sensor and we jumped those wires out, and then we took the unplugged the engine controller and we checked and we found that we got a good wire loop all the way back to the speed sensor and all the way back to the engine controller, and it wasn't shorted to ground anywhere. Seems like you ought to get a signal in the engine controller, but we didn't get one. And so I said, well, what we're going to do is go back there, we're going to cut the wires loose from the vehicle speed sensor back there in the back, and we're going to pull a couple of wires. You just tie them and pull them all the way up here to the front, you know, because we were going to, you know, he ran the wires through the loom and all that. And so I got my little scope, little handheld scope, and put on there. And while we were driving the vehicle on the lift, you know, well, this is kind of what we did here. We basically hooked the scope up to that vehicle speed sensor, and I got a wave as long as the wires on the truck were out of the loop. And so we ran new wires. We just ran a wire overlay from, we cut the wires out that were there, we ran a wire harness overlay from here to the engine controller, and then we got our speedometer, we got our transmission shift and all that. Now whenever you're running an overlay like that, always make sure you run it through some loom, run it so it won't get wrapped around the drive shaft or lay against the exhaust or something like that. That wasn't a very difficult repair, was it? But you had to think outside of that box of where, oh, I know the wires are good, I just don't know what's wrong. And that was where the guy that owned the truck was in. He was having a hard time with that. Now on this one here, this was a 97 F-150 with 98,000 miles, speedometer inoperative, and the overdrive light was flashing. Now the overdrive light's going to flash if there's a transmission related code in there, and that's when the overdrive light's flashing, that's telling you I see something wrong with the transmission part of it. And there she is. How nice of you to join us.
I had to do lunch.
Alright, so this was a clean, high mileage pickup with 3 little problems. A knowledgeable glance at the repair order indicated all 3 concerns were closely related. Alright, so the speedometer was inoperative, the overdrive light was flashing, and the check engine light was on. All 3 of those were tied together. And so, in the old days, if an unscrupulous vehicle owner wanted to rack up a few thousand unrecorded miles, he just disconnected the speedometer cable and drove around not knowing how fast they were going for a few months. I did have one guy that rented a car one time, and he took the speedometer out of there, and he was trying to, he was a guy from in the military, and he was well, you know, those guys, people from up north that think they're smarter than southern folks. You know,
yep.
some guy, because I have a southern accent on my YouTube channel the other day, called me a redneck. Thing about it is, I got tickled because I went to school in Enterprise, Alabama. I went all the way through school. I was made fun of in Enterprise, Alabama, because of the way I talked. Really, you know.
You ain't heard nothing. You going back down.
Anyhow, but it was kind of funny, you know, just because somebody talks. You know, Sierra is one of the smartest people I know, and she talks more country than I do. All right, so all right. Anyway. Well, there were those that would illegally reset the mileage. Now, it wasn't illegal, but at the dealership, when we replaced the speedometer, we'd usually take the mileage drum from the original speedometer and put it in the new speedo head to preserve the mileage and not have a red 10th digit. Because believe it or not, back in the old days, they put a red 10th digit. I'm sure Timothy remembers this. You'd have a red 10th digit over if you replace the speedometer, and that would knock about 25% off your resale value. I mean, off the, you know, as soon as they saw that red 10th digit, they didn't know how many miles you had on it because they know if the speedometer's in replace. And so, well, we just take that drum with the original miles that were showing and put it right back in there. See the red 10th digit right there? We would put it in there so they'd have a black 10th digit, and the original miles would still be on the truck. The funny thing, in a Ford shop manual, it said 1,000,000-mile odometer. You know, there's no procedure for fixing this, but it's illegal to put a truck out of the shop or a vehicle out of the shop with less miles than it came in with. It's a federal breach of law. You know, so don't go there. Anyway, this was a little procedure I used. A little screwdriver, pop the needle off. You know, like whenever I was fixing this little problem with the speedometer needle bouncing, I would pop that needle off, and then I would take this apart, and I'd get that off of there, And I take this and I put a little drop of oil right there, and then when I put it back together, when I put the needle back in, I put it so it's pointing at that little mark, and then I'd raise it and put it over that post, put it back in, and that would stop all this bouncing needle jump. That's sort of a thing of the past now, because the speedometers nowadays are all electronic pretty much. Even if they got a needle, they're still electronic. That's the way this one was. This one was already a high mileage vehicle, and nothing had been disconnected, but speedometer was completely dead. It wouldn't do anything. Well, on this one, the PCM receives a signal directly from the speed sensor, as does the cruise control, and the PCM depends on the speed signal for transmission shift strategy, just like that Silverado did, right? Okay, since the PCM promptly illuminated the check engine light and started flashing the OD light on the purtle stick, the signal obviously wasn't present there. You know what the purtle stick is, right?
The what?
Hard drive.
That's the thing with where you grab it and put it in gear, and it says purtle down there. You know? All right.
Right there.
The signal obviously wasn't present there, so the related symptom was the cruise control was inoperative as well, because it didn't know how fast the vehicle was going. All right, and so here we are, we got a solid state electronic speedometer, and there are your little speed sensors right here. See, it's ground, speed sensor, pretty simple, nothing to it very much, but that instrument cluster gets that, and that's what that speed sensor looks like. The one on that vehicle that y'all saw yesterday, it didn't have anything except just a wheel going past a variable reluctance sensor, the one that we looked at. And it's kind of like a crank sensor, it's a little teeth into it. Powertrain control module gets its speed signal directly from the speed sensor, as does the cruise. You notice that when you got these little dotted wires right here, that means they're going places that are not shown here, right? So if you see that, if it's a solid wire, that means that's the only place it goes. But if it's a dotted wire on a schematic like that, that means there's other places that it doesn't go. Okay. Now the PCM depends on the speed signal for transmission shift. Illuminated the check engine light. Start flashing it. These are the same, right? And that's what I was talking about a minute ago. Any effective repair of electronic speedometer concern demands an understanding of the stuff behind the dash and under the truck. If you're just throwing your arms up and say, I don't know what I'm going to do, then you're very helpless. So know your sensors. Which does what on what truck? Now the one in the rear end on your truck, that's a little sensor that fails all the time.
I've done like 5 of them.
Yeah, they always fail. They don't cost much though. They're real cheap, $12, $15 at the most, and all that. And you've got a little. There used to be hanging right here on this thing one of those little rings like what went past the Spencer on your truck. I don't know who took it or what happened to it. But anyway, that's what it looks like in there. Now the old PSOM like you had is I'm gonna show you a picture of one of them in a minute. This one here is the one like we had on this truck right here. Okay, and we also changed one like this on my dad's Grand Marquis too, because it was throwing a code sometimes, even though it was working most all the time. Now that one right there basically goes to the PCM too, but the GEM module reads that too. The speed control amplifier, rear air suspension module if you got it, and the instrument cluster. See how they tie all that together? Now they did get later on to where they would take some of the wheel speed signals on some of the vehicles and run it from the ABS module over to the other modules and let it just get the information that way. This is what your speedometer looks like right there. And there are 1,100 different programs on this that you can set if you know how to do it for your different size tires and all that stuff. They have received vehicle speed from the differential speed sensor, and that vehicle was a year newer. The one that we're working on was a year newer. You're going to have different rules. Hardwired to the ABS module, but the PSOM intercepted the signal, or interpreted, excuse me, directly from the sensor and reshaped it before sending it out to the PCM. So basically, what you had here, the PSOM on that one, it basically had to align and define the signal and put out a different kind of signal, same information, but the signal didn't look the same way, so you couldn't just hook the wires up and expect it to be height. The differential speed sensor was hardwired to the ABS module, but the PSOM intercepted it, right? Now I actually got some of these slides with the same words on them, my bad. The 97 F-150 still has a differential speed sensor in the rear axle. Did you see this the other day? Who changed that sensor for me? On my dad's Grand Marquis. You did it, didn't you? You remember what it looked like? Remember we had to take the gear, put it on there? And back in the day when the speedometers weren't right, we would have to take and put larger or smaller gears. Now if I put a bigger gear on that, what's that going to do to my speedometer reading?
Make it on
it'll make it read slower. If I put a smaller gear, it's going to make it read faster because it's going to spin it faster, right? So if you add a tooth or subtract a tooth, it was about 5 miles an hour, typically. They have different numbers of teeth. GM did that too on those back in the day. All right, so.
Or just buy the right size tire.
Yeah. Well, not only that, sometimes when we were at the dealership, we'd get one that wasn't reading right. This lady brought her tempo in there one day. She said, my tempo is brand new and it makes strange noises going down the road. And when I got in her tempo and I headed out toward Ozark, I noticed that not only was it making strange noises, it was because it was getting wind turbulence, and I was showing 60 miles an hour on the speedometer, but I was going past cars like they were standing still. So I basically did a little calculation using mile markers, and her speedometer was reading 60 miles an hour. She was going 85. And this was a brand new car. And so basically I had to put her another speedometer in there. But anyway, by 99, the four-wheel anti-lock brake module would become the clearinghouse for vehicle speed information, receive the differential speed sensor signal, filter it, send it out to the cruise, the cluster, and the PCM in a different form. So you got to know how all the stuff is wired up if you're going to fix the darn thing. That means you go to your description and operation page and find out how it's wired and how the modules are all fit in there. The scan tool threw me a P0500 code, which was just what I expected, and a quick look at the live data display showed a 0 reading for the vehicle speed sensor. You're going to be amazed when you find out what I did to fix this darn thing. The check engine light and a flashing OD indicator, when both activated, usually indicate a problem has arisen that will affect both, you know. So you've got this light flashing, the check engine light on, and a P0500 code. All right, so you're going to be looking at that. All right, so we looked at it. We're going to make sure I had actually seen it where that little plastic gear on the output shaft would be loose moving around on there. And that would keep the speedometer from working. Or you had something actually going wrong here. One time when I was teaching my young boy, Matt, of course he's 37 now, I was teaching him about vehicle speed sensors, and you could take one of the vehicle speed sensor and hook a little LED up to it and spin it, and that LED would blink. You know, he said, why don't we hook a motor to the LED and let it spin and turn the light on all the time? I said, why don't we hook a battery to the light? You know, it'd be the same deal. But anyway, the long and the short of it, you can actually check one of those and see if it's putting out like that. Or you can use a scope or a little LED or something like that. Sometimes a dog or a rat will chew the wires and cause problems, but I didn't see nothing like that here. So I'm saying, what are we going to do? We're trying to be surgical. We don't want to throw all kinds of parts on this thing and charge a bunch of money, because Thomas don't like that. Now, removing the speed sensor, I did a visual inspection, filtered that thing off. It was healthy, you know, didn't really see anything wrong with it. Some four-wheel drive pickups, the gear would be dancing around loose on the shaft, but this one didn't have that problem. All right, so the speedometer's got an intricate little microprocessor built into it, like the ones you see up there on that shelf. What interested me was whether the sensor was actually generating a speed signal and whether it was reading at the cluster connector. So we basically, so what we did in the engine controller, we went to the engine controller connector to see, you know, actually, so when I first checked it with my scope the other day, I just unplugged the engine controller. Well, actually, I back probed it, and we fired it up and we ran, and it was a flat line. This time I had a wave, all right? So I'll pop the trim cover off. If you hadn't done one of these, pay attention. You need to know how to do this. You hear me? All right. You're going to turn this, you see a little screwdriver? This is like on a 97, 98 model, 99. You put it in there. You pull that knob off. You turn it over, put it on there backwards. And then whenever you turn that knob, it releases a little catch, and you pull that thing out of there. If you try to take this thing out of there with a screwdriver, you'll bust it. Right? Now, it's odd because some of the Tauruses had a similar look to this, but they didn't come out that way. But these pickups did. Now, there's one screw behind the headlight switch that has to be taken out. That's why you had to pull the headlight switch out. All right, so I got in here, found out which wires were coming for the clutch razor, gray wire with your black stripe and all that. And the fuse panel junction box will go bad sometimes and start bleeding voltage from other circuits to the VSS signal wire. I got some of them junction boxes back there that got wet because water dripping from a bad windshield seal, and we had to replace those, you know, and all that. All right, so was there a signal at the cluster? And so runs through a wire coated gray with a black stripe that travels from the speed sensor to Speedo head. The PCM also relieves the connection from the ground side of the 2-pin sensor PCM 1033. I know there's going to be a pop test on this tomorrow, so you need to remember all this stuff I'm saying. All right, was there a signal? Driving the truck, I got a signal. So what do I know now? Sound like I got a bad speedometer maybe or something? do you think? Everybody says, we don't really care what we're thinking, we just want them to shut up when we go to lunch. Right? All right.
The wires.
We jacked the rear wheels up to the forward jack, dropped it in drive, and I'm looking at that. Remember, that's what we did. We had it off the ground. We're looking, we're running the thing so we can check it, static, and all that. See, the similar way we're doing this, we're going to find out, well, am I actually getting a signal here? We get our meter and put it on there. It's my ET332. Y'all probably don't have a meter like that. All right. I decided to reconnect the cluster and recheck the pedometer operation, and it woke up. Started working. You know, back whenever I was working on a lot of these old Renault vehicles, they had a Premier. They call it the Eagle Premier, but it's made by Renault. They'd have little boxes in the dash that sometimes you'd unplug them and plug them back in. And they start working. Just rebooting it. That's all you're doing. You know what I mean? Sometimes you reboot it. And so if you reboot it and it starts working, what I typically tell a customer is, rebooted this thing, unplugged it, plugged it back in, let it forget everything. Some of your GM vehicles, all the cluster will go crazy and go dark and all. Just reboot the darn thing, see what it does. And a lot of times they'll come back away. You know, some of them, if you know which fuse to unplug. Remember that Mustang I had one time where I wrote a whole article for Motor Age about quirky electronics. And the stupid thing, and there's nothing in a book that's going to teach you any of this stuff. And like you figure, like I'm going to go to the shop manual, I'm going to go A, B, C, D. So I got a hold of the hotline, and I says, look, I said, I turned on the key for the fob. So you know, people program the fob, turn on the key 5 times, won't, won't, hit the button on the fob, won't, won't, turn it back off, won't, won't, and it's supposed to, then the fob's supposed to work. On the 99 Mustang, I guess, well, wouldn't work. Fob's new, everything's fine. Do it again, won't work. Do it again, won't work. Found a special service message that reflashed the gem, did that, didn't touch it. So then I called them up and they said, wait a minute, I worked on this whenever it was being developed. You got to go to a fuse number or whatever it was, 22 or whatever it was, unplug it for about 30 seconds, plug it back in, and everything will be fine. So I did that, and the stupid door locks went to working. Now the other day on this Crown Victoria that belongs to the college, this 03 model, you remember that? I did this 5 times, it went won't, won't. I mashed the button and it went won't, won't, but it wouldn't work. That one had a weak battery in the fob. So there's all kinds of stuff that you got to kind of think outside the box on. You know, we used to see stuff.
Can my car have fob on it?
Huh? Not anymore. All right, so.
I want to know if I can, I'll buy one.
You can put a fob on any car if you got power door lock.
I'm getting that fob, but they're usually like $4. No, like.
You can buy the little kits at the parts store for like 40 bucks or something. Yeah, they don't cost much.
Yeah.
No, man, I used to put them on there all the time when I was at the dealership, and they that hard. Of course, you have to be a real cowboy to do it. Are you a real cowboy?
Yep.
All right. On one end, the speedometer might work just fine from now on. On the other hand, it might quit before the customer got out of the parking lot, no matter how far I drove to verify my repair. Now, the customer chose to pay for diagnosis and drove away happy. Could I have rebooted this one by connecting the battery? I don't know. That's just one funny old thing. The little Eagle Premier story. I got in there and unplugged this little thing. It said monitor that checked all the fluid levels and everything. A little small box, and it was just showing gibberish. And it belonged to a guy, the Japanese guy from the Sony plant. Now, usually those people will, and I'm not saying anything ethnic, but they'll usually drive a Toyota or something because that's what they're familiar with, because they're from Japan, right? So this guy, I don't know why he got an Americanized R25 Renault, but it was the Eagle Premier. And so he came in there and I unplugged the thing, wires, plug it back in. It woke up and said, monitor, everything's fine. I said, okay, I unplugged that thing, you know, plugged it back in. If it gives any more trouble, you know, we'll just have to replace it. So he says, okay. So he comes back a little bit. Now I was saying gibberish again. So I put it in there. And there was a couple of little lights in there behind the prindle area that stay on all the time when the key's on. And I did not know it at the time, but if you just jiggle those lights a little bit, it'll blow them out, which is unusual for a car automotive bulb, you know. But anyway, he came back and says, this doesn't work anymore. And so I said, I don't know what I did with that. I didn't fool with that. I just basically went in there, and it must have happened that I moved them a little bit or something, but it wasn't that hard to get to that thing. Anyway, the thing I had to replace, and he was throwing a big fit about it because the mechanic that checked it said that they needed to be paid to put the bulbs in there. So here we are all sitting on the surface of the boss man's couch. this Japanese guy and me and the service manager and the other mechanic, we're all sitting there. And the guy says, you know, we don't have trouble like this with our cars in Japan. So why should I have to pay? You know, or something like that. He's basically throwing off on the, this is a French car, okay? Anyway, so he's saying the Japanese cars are better than French cars, so why should I pay? We were the Renault dealer at the time, Eagle. And he says, I says, I figured I'd have some fun with the guy. I said, you know that little thing that I changed out on your car that said monitor on it that kept giving trouble? He goes, yeah. I said, it was made in Japan. He went, oh, I don't know what that meant. Anyway, we fixed the thing and didn't charge him anything. That was a funny little moment whenever I told him it was a little, I don't know if it was made in Japan or not. I probably lied to him about it. Well, that's what you know. And I said, I got a little ill whenever he said, we don't have trouble with our cars like this in Japan. If he had to change the bearing on a doggone Toyota Tacoma like we had to do on the left, he would have a different perspective because that's the dumbest thing that I've ever seen. I called a guy at a tire store. I said, you ever change one of those things on a Toyota Tacoma? He said, yeah, there's nothing fun about it. I don't know why they built that thing that way. It's as hard as all get out. You know, but anyway, we beat that rascal. Anyway, anybody got any questions? Come on.
I changed a wheel bearing in a railroad Toyota Tacoma.
Yeah, you done that. And y'all had to, that's why they charge $700 to do one on your granddad's truck. But anyway, we beat the snot out of that one. All right, anybody wants to go to lunch now, it's okay. You go ahead now. So.